Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just go ahead and take a look at state machines again, but this time with the help of an HTTP request. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just get rid of this and I'm going to say current state of the app is, and we can probably just get along with, use state itself if we use just a single string and do not attach any metadata. So I can say state and set state and use state and let's say idle, right? So we will have, let's see how many states we can have. The first one we'll have is idle. The second one we will have is loading. The third one we'll have is loaded. The fourth one we'll have is error, right? So these four states sort of like are okay to begin with. So I'm going to go ahead and say state right here, and we are at idle. If you are using TypeScript, you can pretty much just restrict the value of the state as well, but more on that later on when we are in the TypeScript course. So anyway, you start with an idle state, and you can see that I have a data.json file inside my public folder here. So I can go to /data.json, and I'm going to see that I get this nice little JSON. So let's go ahead and load this. So the way I'm going to do is I'm going to have a use effect right here, and we're going to be covering how we can better do HTTP request inside of the React ecosystem section with React query. But for now, let me just go ahead and use this. So I'm going to say fetch this thing, and we can pretty much just drop that. And then I'm going to say do something, right? So this could be your custom logic. I'm not really going to get into that. But the way you approach this is that the moment you're about to fetch the request is you set the state to loading, right? Now, the moment you do that, your application becomes aware of that and the HTTP request is sent. Now, once the request is successful, you set the state again to loaded. However, if the request was not successful, you set the state to, I don't know, something like error, right? Which is mentioned here. Now, if you have more than, let's say if you have multiple things to store, you can create an object if you want, that's completely fine. You can also use a use reducer if you want to, that's also fine. But the crux of the thing is now your application is pretty much in a better position to handle a lot of edge cases, right, than before. Because if you just had, state or maybe like loaded and loading, set loading, and then you set it like that, then how do you handle the error things, right? So now you can see if we refresh, and if I go ahead and try to do a little bit of throttling, let's see if that helps. Slow 3G. If I go ahead and refresh this, you could see, well, for a split second, it appears loading and then it appears loaded, right? So if I go ahead and, for example, let's say if I have a button clicked here, right? Or maybe like not in an effect. We don't really want that to happen in an effect. So let's add a function clicked, right? And we do on click this thing, right? So now when you're on idle, when you click on this, well, let's refresh. When you click on this, you see you get a loading for a split second, and once the data is loaded, you get loaded, right? So I'm going to refresh this again just to see how this works. Idle, loading, and loaded. So meanwhile it is loading, for example, you can say if state is equal to loading, you can say return. Now this becomes very convenient, right? Because now you have all sorts of placeholders for your stuff. Now, you can also make use of this error state, and the way you will use it is simply by saying if state is equal to error, you can say something like error fetching your request, because it is quite possible that right here you might be, if you're storing this data, the data which you get inside a state variable, you might be using it directly, right? So if you do that, and if the request errors out for some reason, if it is a network error or just not able to fetch it, then you are in trouble because your application will crash and the user will see just a white page. So in order to avoid that, you should have proper error handling, And a good way to do that is to use this sort of concept, which is making state out of your application. So once we have that in place, if I refresh this again, and if I click on this, you can see we get the loading message. And once it is loaded, we get the loaded message. Now I can go ahead and make this data2.json, which is going to fail the request because that file does not exist, data2.json. So if I click on this now, we get a loading message, and looks like we do not get a network request error. So let's just try to simulate one. So the way we can do it is we can try to json.parse this data, right? Because now this will not be able to parse the data, the JSON response. So we can now refresh this, click on this, and you could see that this request, although it succeeds, but because we were not able to parse the data, it fails, and thus we land in the catch region, which sets the request to error fetching your request. Or maybe, you can even go a step beyond this. So you can say try json.parse and then set the state to loading. And if you catch any error in this step, you see it becomes very convenient now to define multiple behaviors once you have state. So you can say JSON error, right? Or request error. Or right here, you can say network error. So now you can have custom behavior. If you have network error, then error fetching a request. If the state is request error, then you can say something like bad server response. Right, so now if you go ahead and refresh this one more time, and the moment it loads, if you try to make an HTTP request in offline mode, if you click, you get an error fetching your request. But if you try to do the same thing inside an online mode, but with a wrong file name, if you click on this, you can see we get bad server response. So having the state mechanism in place will help you a lot. And this is something you should follow as well. It keeps your component logic clean, keeps you sane, instead of, if you just had a loading and set loading Boolean value here, it would not have helped you much. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. I'm going to see you in the next one really soon.